From Mockery to Mastery, a violin prodigy's journey. A group of privileged teachers bullied a poor scholarship student by forcing her to play violin for the school showcase, expecting humiliation. When the girl took the stage, everyone was left speechless. No one could have imagined what would happen next, a story of resilience and hope that will touch your heart. Welcome back. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and enjoy the story. The winter sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Westfield Academy, the light barely warming the ornate hallways of the prestigious institution. Nestled in Boston's most affluent neighborhood, the Academy stood like a fortress of privilege, its brick walls and ivy-covered facade a testament to old money and carefully preserved tradition. It was within these hallowed halls that 15-year-old Grace Hernandez felt most invisible, and perhaps that was for the best. Grace clutched her worn textbooks tighter against her chest as she navigated the crowded hallway between classes. Her scholarship uniform, identical in design to those of her wealthy classmates but somehow always looking a bit more faded, a bit more worn, made her stand out even as she tried to disappear. 3 months at Westfield had taught her that invisibility was her best defense. "Watch it, scholarship," sneered Olivia Winchester as Grace accidentally brushed against her designer backpack. The group of girls surrounding Olivia tittered with practiced disdain. "Sorry," Grace mumbled, quickening her pace toward her next class, keeping her eyes fixed on the polished marble floor. What her classmates didn't see was the fire that burned behind Grace's carefully lowered gaze. What they couldn't know was that beneath her quiet exterior lay determination forged through years of hardship. Grace's mother worked double shifts at the hospital as a custodian to keep their tiny apartment in Dorchester, the less favorable side of Boston. Every night, Grace studied by the dim light of a desk lamp salvaged from a neighbor's cast-offs, knowing that academic excellence was her only ticket to a future different from her present. But it wasn't just books that filled Grace's dreams. In the corner of their cramped living room sat a case, its leather cracked with age, containing the one possession she treasured above all else, her grandfather's violin. Before his hands had grown too gnarled with arthritis, before his mind had begun to wander down paths that led away from the present, he had placed those weathered fingers over hers, guiding them across the strings, teaching her to make the instrument. "Sing. Music speaks when words fail, Mija," he told her in his accented English. "Remember that when the world seems too heavy." Grace hadn't played since his funeral 2 years ago. The violin remained in its case, a silent reminder of what once was and what might have been. Her grandfather had played in orchestras across Europe before immigrating to America, where opportunities for foreign musicians dwindled, forcing him to take whatever jobs he could find. His talent, like so many dreams in their community, had been set aside in the name of survival. In the staff room of Westfield Academy, a different kind of conversation was taking place. Headmaster Price stood before the assembled faculty, his patrician features arranged in an expression of practiced concern. "The spring showcase is 6 weeks away, and we've lost our violin soloist. The Richardsons have pulled Thomas out for their extended trip to Switzerland." He sighed heavily, as if the inconvenience of wealthy parents prioritizing alpine skiing over school commitments was the gravest injustice. "We need a replacement immediately. The trustees will be in attendance, not to mention potential donors." In the back of the room, Ms. Harmon, the literature teacher, exchanged a glance with Mr. Walsh, the calculus instructor. Both had been privy to Headmaster Price's earlier complaint about the scholarship element diluting Westfield's prestigious image, a thinly veiled reference to students like Grace. "What about the scholarship girl?" Ms. Harmon suggested, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Hernandez. She's in my third period class. Quiet thing, hardly speaks." Mr. Walsh picked up on her tone. "Perfect solution. These community outreach cases should contribute something beyond occupying a seat, shouldn't they?" Mrs. Bennett, the music director, frowned slightly. At 58, she had seen decades of Westfield politics play out, usually at the expense of students who didn't fit the preferred mold. "Does she even play the violin?" "Does it matter?" Mr. Walsh replied with a dismissive wave. "The showcase needs a soloist. Even if she's mediocre, it shows our commitment to..." Diversity. The way he said the word made it clear it was merely a fashionable inconvenience to be tolerated. Headmaster Price considered for a moment. The trustees would appreciate the optics. Very well, Mrs. Bennet, see to it. What began as a casual suggestion quickly morphed into something uglier. By the end of the staff meeting, a wager had formed. Among a certain faction of the faculty, $20 each in the pool for when, not if, the scholarship student embarrassed herself on stage. "My money's on her not making it through the first minute," laughed Miss Harmon. Mrs. Bennet remained, silent discomfort evident in the tight line of her mouth. She had not joined the bet, but neither had she objected strongly enough to stop it. The next day, Grace was summoned to the music room during her study period. Confused, she hesitated at the threshold of the large, acoustically engineered space. Unlike the fluorescent-lit classrooms, the music room was designed to impress, with warm wooden panels and a grand piano positioned beneath a small skylight. Mrs. Bennet looked up from her desk, glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Ah, Grace, come in." She gestured to a chair. "I'll be direct. We've had an unexpected opening for a violin soloist in the spring showcase. Headmaster Price suggested you might fill the position." Grace's heart skipped. "Me? But I—" "Do you play?" Mrs. Bennet interrupted, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. Grace hesitated. "I used to. My grandfather taught me, but it's been a couple of years." Something flickered across Mrs. Bennet's face. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest trace of guilt. She cleared her throat. "Well, the piece isn't particularly challenging. Mendelssohn's Concerto in E minor. Just the first movement. We can provide a school instrument for practice." Grace's mind raced. She recognized the piece. Her grandfather had played it often, his fingers dancing across the strings with the muscle memory of decades. She had attempted it under his guidance, never mastering its complexities. "I don't think I can—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Bennet cut her off again, more firmly this time. "This is a tremendous opportunity for someone in your position. The trustees will be watching. Think of your scholarship renewal." The implication hung heavy in the air. Grace understood the unspoken threat. Perform or risk losing everything. Her mother had sacrificed for. "When would I start?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Bennet opened a cabinet and removed a violin case that had seen better days. The school's loaner instruments were notorious among the music students for their poor quality. She placed it on the desk between them. "Immediately, the showcase is 6 weeks from Saturday." She slid a folder of sheet music across the desk. "Practice rooms are available during free periods and after school until 5. You'll meet with MA twice weekly for assessment." As Grace took the case, her fingers trembling slightly, she caught Mrs. Bennet's expression, something between resignation and thinly veiled skepticism. What Grace couldn't know was that in that moment, Mrs. Bennet was already regretting her passive role in what was clearly becoming a cruel setup. That afternoon, Grace opened the violin case in the privacy of the smallest practice room, little more than a closet with sound-dampening panels. The instrument inside was functional but neglected, its varnish dull and strings worn. She lifted it carefully, positioning it under her chin as her grandfather had taught her. The weight felt both foreign and familiar, like encountering an old friend after years apart. Drawing the bow across the strings produced a screech that made her wince. She adjusted her finger position, trying again. The note came out warbling and uncertain. Grace closed her eyes, remembering her grandfather's hands guiding hers, his voice gentle but insistent. "Feel the music before you play it, Mija. Hear it in your heart first." For 30 minutes, she struggled through basic scales, her fingers stiff and uncooperative. By the time she had to leave for her bus, frustration had built a lump in her throat. She wasn't ready for this. The Mendelssohn piece lay unopened in its folder, too intimidating to even attempt. On the crowded bus ride home, wedged between strangers with shopping bags and briefcases, Grace made a decision. She would tell Mrs. Bennet tomorrow that she couldn't do it. Better to admit defeat now than to face public humiliation later. But when she arrived home to find her mother asleep on the couch, still in her hospital scrubs, exhaustion etched into the lines of her face, Grace's resolve wavered. On the counter lay a notice from the building manager, another warning about their late rent payment. Beside it, a letter from Westfield Academy outlining the expectations for scholarship renewal, including participation in school community activities. Grace set down her backpack and moved quietly to the corner where her grandfather's violin waited. She ran her fingers over the case, remembering the way his eyes had lit up when he played, how for those moments the hardships of his life seemed to fall away. Music had been his refuge. Perhaps it could be hers too. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, Grace eased her grandfather's violin from its case. Unlike the school's loaner, this instrument had been cherished, its wood warm and responsive, despite years of disuse. She tightened the bow, applied rosin with practiced movements that came back to her through muscle memory, and began to play. The sound was hesitant at first, but purer than what she had produced earlier. She worked through scales again, then simple melodies her grandfather had taught her. By the time she attempted the opening phrases of the Mendelssohn piece, reading from the sheet music propped against a stack of books, her confidence had grown enough to recognize the monumental task ahead. One measure at a time, she whispered to herself, her grandfather's favorite advice when she'd felt overwhelmed by a difficult passage. Over the next few days, Grace established a routine. She practiced on the school's violin during her free period, focusing on technical exercises. At home, late at night when the building was quiet, she worked on the Mendelssohn with her grandfather's instrument, connecting to the emotional core of the music. Her first assessment with Mrs. Bennet went poorly. Grace's nerves got the better of her, and her fingers fumbled over passages she had played adequately at home. "Well," Mrs. Bennet said after Grace finished, the single word weighted with disappointment. "We have our work cut out for us, don't we?" What neither of them noticed was Mr. Rodriguez, the school's elderly janitor, pausing in his work outside the music room door, his ear turned toward the sound of Grace's playing. His weathered hands stilled on his mop as he listened, his expression thoughtful. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The following week brought little improvement. Grace practiced diligently, but technical challenges in the concerto continued to elude her. During her second assessment, Mrs. Bennet's patience visibly thinned. "Perhaps we should consider a simpler piece," she suggested, not unkindly. "This concerto requires years of training that you simply haven't had." Grace felt her cheeks burn with shame and frustration. "I can do it. I just need more time." Mrs. Bennet removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Time is precisely what we don't have, Grace. The showcase—" "Excuse me." The voice from the doorway startled them both. Mr. Rodriguez stood there, mop in hand, his normally reserved demeanor replaced by something almost eager. "I couldn't help overhearing. The young lady's bowing technique, if I might suggest." Mrs. Bennet's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Rodriguez, we're in the middle of a lesson." "Of course, forgive me." He ducked his head apologetically. "It's just, her elbow position is restricting her movement." A small adjustment would improve her tone considerably. A tense silence followed. Grace looked between them, confused by the janitor's unexpected intervention. Mrs. Bennet seemed equally puzzled. "And you know this because—" she finally asked. Mr. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "I played many years ago." Mrs. Bennet studied him with new interest. After a moment's consideration, she gestured him in. "Show us, then." Hesitantly, he set aside his mop and approached Grace. With careful, respectful movements, he demonstrated an adjustment to her arm position. "Like this," he said quietly. "Feel how it frees your wrist." Grace tried the position, drawing the bow across the strings. The difference was immediate, the tone richer, more resonant. "Again," he encouraged. "But this time, think of the bow as an extension of your arm, not something you're controlling." Grace played the difficult passage once more. While not perfect, the improvement was undeniable. Mrs. Bennet watched with barely concealed surprise. "Well," she said when Grace finished, "that was helpful, Mr. Rodriguez, thank you." The janitor nodded, already backing toward the door. "Happy to assist. I should return to my duties." As he left, Grace called out, "Thank you." He paused, offering a slight smile. "Practice that position until it becomes natural. Your grandfather would be proud. Grace's eyes widened. How did you— The way you hold the violin, he explained. Old European style. Not many teach that anymore. With that enigmatic comment, he disappeared into the hallway. Mrs. Bennet cleared her throat, reclaiming Grace's attention. Well, that was unexpected. But let's continue. From the beginning with your new position. That evening, Grace found Mr. Rodriguez polishing the trophy cases in the main hall after most students had left. She approached hesitantly, clutching her violin case. Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you again for your help today. He glanced around as if ensuring they weren't observed. You have natural talent, he said quietly, but talent needs guidance. Mrs. Bennet is trying, Grace offered. He smiled kindly. Mrs. Bennet is a pianist. She knows music, yes, but the violin— He gestured expressively. The violin demands specific knowledge. Grace took a deep breath. Could you maybe show me more? I practice in room 110 during fourth period. If you're not busy— Something lit up in the old man's eyes. A spark of what might have been passion reigniting. Perhaps, if my duties allow. The next day, Grace was midway through a particularly frustrating passage when the door to the practice room opened quietly. Mr. Rodriguez slipped in, closing it behind him. May I? He asked, gesturing to her positioning. When she nodded, he made several small adjustments to her fingers. The violin remembers, he said softly. Even when we forget, it remembers how it should be held, how it wants to sing. For 20 minutes he offered guidance, subtle corrections to her technique, insights into approaching difficult runs. His knowledge was clearly extensive, his instructions precise and effective. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Grace felt she had learned more than in all her sessions with Mrs. Bennet. Same time tomorrow? She asked hopefully. Mr. Rodriguez hesitated. It would be better if Mrs. Bennet didn't know. Some might consider it inappropriate for the janitor to be teaching a student. Grace understood immediately. Class boundaries at Westfield were rigid and rarely crossed. It'll be our secret, she promised. Thus began a clandestine partnership. 3 times a week, Mr. Rodriguez, Jorge as he eventually invited her to call him when they were alone, would slip into her practice room during fourth period. His guidance was transformative. Within 2 weeks, Grace's playing had improved dramatically. What Mr. Rodriguez offered wasn't just technical advice, but a deeper understanding of the music itself. You play the notes correctly, he told her, but Mendelssohn didn't write just notes. He wrote emotions. Joy here. He pointed to a soaring phrase, and here, longing. Play what he felt, not just what he wrote. One day, curiosity got the better of her. Where did you learn to play like this? A shadow crossed his face. Another life, he said simply. Then, seeing her disappointment, he elaborated slightly. Madrid Conservatory, then 10 years with the Barcelona Symphony, until— He flexed his right hand, where Grace noticed a slight tremor. Until I couldn't anymore. Grace's third assessment with Mrs. Bennet revealed her progress. The music teacher listened with growing astonishment as Grace played through the first section of the concerto with newfound confidence. This is remarkable improvement, Mrs. Bennet admitted when Grace finished. How have you managed such progress? Grace thought of Mr. Rodriguez, of their secret lessons. Practice, she said, the partial truth burning on her tongue. Lots of practice. As the weeks passed, whispers spread through the faculty lounge. The scholarship student was actually showing promise. The betting pool, once focused on the extent of her failure, shifted. Some teachers doubled down on their predictions of disaster, while others quietly withdrew their wagers. Mrs. Bennet found herself in a moral quandary. What had begun as a cruel setup was evolving into something else entirely. The girl had talent, raw and unrefined but genuine. During their fourth assessment, she made a decision. Grace, I'd like to start working with you more intensively, she announced. Twice weekly isn't sufficient. Can you stay after school on Mondays and Wednesdays as well? Grace hesitated, thinking of her responsibilities at home. I need to be home by 6 to help my mom. I'll ensure you have transportation, Mrs. Bennet interrupted, surprising herself with the offer. This is important, Grace. You have a real opportunity here." What Grace couldn't know was that Mrs. Bennet had begun to see the showcase not as a potential humiliation, but as a chance for redemption, both Grace's and her own. Caught up in the thrill of her musical progress, the following night, Grace excitedly attempted a particularly difficult passage on her grandfather's violin. Her mother, home earlier than usual from her shift, appeared in the doorway. "Mija, what are you doing?" Elena Hernandez asked, her voice tinged with wonder. "I haven't heard you play since before Abuelo." Grace lowered the violin, suddenly shy. "They asked me to perform for the school showcase. It's a really big deal, Mama." Elena crossed the small living room and embraced her daughter. "He would be so proud," she whispered. "So proud to hear his violin sing again." For the first time, Grace shared the full story. The unexpected assignment, her initially disastrous attempts, Mr. Rodriguez's secret mentorship, and her growing confidence. She left out her suspicions about the teacher's initial motivations, not wanting to worry her mother. Elena's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I've been so busy working, I didn't even notice you were bringing music back into our home." She touched the violin reverently. "When is this performance? I'll request the night off." "You don't have to." "I do," Eleanor insisted. "Some things are more important than an extra shift. My daughter playing her grandfather's music is one of them." The moment was so perfect, so filled with warmth, that Grace almost missed the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs outside their apartment. Then came the pounding on their door. "Hernandez, open up!" The building manager's voice boomed through the thin door. "People are complaining about the noise. No music after 8, you know the rules." The joy of the moment evaporated. Elena sighed, moving to open the door, while Grace hurriedly returned the violin to its case. "Mr. Dawson, I apologize," Elena began. "Third complaint this week," the burly man interrupted. "One more and we'll have to discuss your lease." After he left, the apartment felt smaller, the walls thinner. Grace sat on the edge of the sofa, the reality of their situation crashing back. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't realize how late it was." Elena's expression was resolute. "You will keep practicing," she said firmly. "We'll figure something out." This is too important. The solution came in the form of extended practice hours at Westfield. Mrs. Bennet, now fully invested in Grace's success, arranged for her to use the music room until 7:30 each evening. For Grace, this meant long days and homework completed on bus rides, but the opportunity to practice freely was worth the exhaustion. As the showcase drew nearer, Grace's progress accelerated. Her secret lessons with Mr. Rodriguez continued, complemented now by Mrs. Bennet's more formal instruction. The older woman found herself increasingly impressed by Grace's intuitive understanding of the music. "You play as if you've known this piece all your life," she remarked during one session. "My grandfather loved Mendelssohn," Grace explained. "He used to say that music is memories we haven't made yet, that when we hear something beautiful, it feels familiar because our souls recognize it." Mrs. Bennet's expression softened. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was," Grace agreed, and for the first time the memory brought more joy than pain. What she didn't know was that Mrs. Bennet had begun to campaign quietly among the faculty, advocating for Grace and expressing disgust at the betting that continued in some corners. Her efforts created a schism among the teachers, those who had come to support Grace, and those who still viewed her as an interloper, disrupting Westfield's carefully maintained social order. Would the group of teachers succeed in their cruel plan to humiliate Grace at the showcase? Or would her determination and hidden talent shine through despite their efforts? Stay tuned to find out if Grace's emotional connection to the violin will overcome years of technical training that her wealthy peers have received. 4 weeks before the showcase, Grace arrived for her practice session with Mr. Rodriguez to find him waiting with an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking," he said, his manner more serious than usual. "The school violin is adequate for practice, but for a performance of this caliber," he shook his head, "you need an instrument worthy of your talent." Grace thought of her grandfather's violin, its warm tone so superior to the school's loner. "I have my grandfather's violin at home, but I can't bring it to school. If something happened to it—" "I understand," he nodded, "which is why I want to offer you something." From behind his maintenance cart, he produced a violin case she hadn't seen before. Unlike her grandfather's weathered case or the school's battered one, this was sleek black leather, clearly expensive. "This was mine," he explained, opening it to reveal a violin that took Grace's breath away. The wood glowed with a deep amber patina that only decades of loving use could produce. "A Giuseppe Rocca, made in 1851. My teacher gave it to me when I joined the Barcelona Symphony." Grace gasped. "Mr. Rodriguez, I couldn't possibly—" "Jorge," he reminded her gently. "And yes, you can. It has been silent too long, like your grandfather's." "Instruments need to be played, Grace. They live through the music they create." He lifted it carefully from its velvet nestling. "Try it." With trembling hands, Grace accepted the violin. As soon as she positioned it under her chin, she felt a difference, not just in the quality, but in something less tangible, as if the instrument itself was eager to be played. When she drew the bow across the strings, the sound was transcendent, rich and complex in ways the school violin could never achieve. "Oh," she breathed, the single syllable conveying her awe. Mr. Rodriguez, Jorge, smiled. "The violin chooses its player as much as the player chooses the violin. This one has chosen you, at least for the showcase." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do it justice," he replied simply. "That's all I ask." From that day forward, Grace practiced exclusively on Jorge's violin, which he kept secured in his small office between sessions. The instrument seemed to unlock something in her playing, a depth of expression that elevated her performance from technically proficient to genuinely moving. Mrs. Bennet noticed the difference immediately. "Where did you get that violin?" she asked during Grace's next formal assessment. Grace hesitated, unsure how to explain. "It's borrowed," she said finally, "for the showcase." Mrs. Bennet examined it with an expert eye. "This is a museum-quality instrument," she said, clearly impressed. "Whoever lent it to you must have tremendous faith in your abilities." The observation stayed with Grace, warming her during the increasingly grueling practice schedule. As the showcase approached, Mrs. Bennet pushed her harder, demanding perfection in passages Grace had previously considered acceptable. There were moments of frustration when Grace wondered if she'd been right to accept this challenge, if she was setting herself up for the very humiliation the teachers had initially planned. During one particularly difficult session, she broke down in tears. "I can't do this," she sobbed, setting the violin aside. "It's too hard. I'm not good enough." Mrs. Bennet, usually composed, surprised Grace by kneeling beside her chair. "Listen to me, Grace. You are more than good enough. What you lack in years of training, you make up for with something far rarer, an authentic connection to the music." She hesitated, then continued, her voice lower. "I need to tell you something. When you were first selected for this solo, it wasn't done with the best intentions. Some faculty members thought—" She broke off, clearly uncomfortable. "They thought I would fail," Grace finished for her, the suspicion she'd harbored from the beginning finally confirmed, "that I would embarrass myself." Mrs. Bennet didn't deny it. "Yes, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't stop it." She met Grace's eyes directly. "But you've proven them wrong already. Regardless of what happens at the showcase, your dedication, your natural talent, you've earned the right to that stage." The confession hung between them, heavy with implication. Grace absorbed the knowledge that her intuition had been correct. She had been set up. But instead of the anger she might have expected to feel, she found a strange sense of resolve crystallizing within her. "I won't give them the satisfaction," she said finally. "I'm going to play so well they'll never look at another scholarship student the same way again." Mrs. Bennet smiled, a hint of fierce pride in her expression. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." As the day of the showcase drew closer, Grace's two mentors, one official, one secret, worked in unwitting tandem to prepare her. Mrs. Bennet focused on precision and performance etiquette, while Jorge nurtured the emotional core of her playing. Between them, they transformed Grace from a novice with raw talent into a musician capable of moving an audience. 2 weeks before the performance, Grace was practicing late in the music room when she overheard voices from the hallway. Curious, she moved closer to the partially open door. "Still think this is going to backfire spectacularly," came Miss Harmon's distinctive voice. "Scholarship or not, 6 weeks isn't enough to master Mendelssohn." "I don't know," replied another voice. "Mr. Walsh," Grace realized. "Bennett seems convinced the girl has something special, talent or whatever." "Talent?" Miss Harmon scoffed. "What she has is Bennett feeling guilty about our little wager. 20 says she freezes on stage." "You're on," Mr. Walsh replied. 30 says she makes it through but butchers the cadenza." Their footsteps moved away down the hall, but Grace remained frozen, the confirmation of the bet hitting her like a physical blow. They were still counting on her failure, still treating her performance as entertainment at her expense. When Jorge arrived for their session the next day, he found Grace playing with an intensity he hadn't seen before, her technique flawless but harsh, driven by something that sounded almost like anger. "Stop," he said, after listening for a few minutes. "Something is wrong. You're playing with your fingers, not your heart." Grace lowered the violin, the previous night's conversation spilling out in a rush of hurt and indignation. "They're betting on when I'll fail," she concluded. "They never expected me to succeed. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning." Jorge was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I suspected as much." "You knew?" Grace felt betrayed anew. "I've worked at Westfield for 15 years, Grace. I've seen how they treat students they consider different." He sighed. "But their cruelty created an opportunity. Without it, you might never have found your way back to music." Grace considered this. "So I should be grateful they tried to humiliate me?" "No," Jorge replied firmly. "But you should recognize that your response to their cruelty, your dedication, your hard work, your passion, that is entirely your victory. They cannot take credit for what you've achieved, and they cannot diminish it with their small-mindedness." He took the violin from her hands, cradling it with the reverence of someone who understood its true value. "This instrument has been played in great concert halls across Europe. It has brought audiences to tears. Now it will help you show those who doubted you the power of music to transcend boundaries, social, economic, cultural." He returned the violin to her. "Play not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right." That evening, for the first time since agreeing to perform, Grace felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. She would play not just for herself or to avoid humiliation, but for her grandfather, who had given her the gift of music, for her mother, who worked tirelessly to give her opportunities, for Jorge, who saw her potential, and even for Mrs. Bennett, who had found the courage to stand against her colleagues' cruelty. With her renewed sense of purpose came accelerated progress. In her final week of preparation, both her mentors remarked on the transformation in her playing. "You've found the soul of the piece," Jorge told her during their last secret session. "Now you just need to share it with the audience. Whatever happens Saturday," Mrs. Bennett said during their final formal assessment, "you should be immensely proud of how far you've come." The night before the showcase, Grace practiced on her grandfather's violin in the quiet of her apartment, her mother listening with tears streaming down her face. "He's here with you," Eleanor whispered when Grace finished, "in every note." "Have you ever faced a situation where others expected you to fail, but you found the strength to prove them wrong? Share your experience in the comments below. The morning of the showcase dawned bright and clear, spring sunshine filtering through Boston's awakening cityscape. Grace barely noticed, her mind filled with passages of music, her fingers moving in silent rehearsal on the bus ride to Westfield. The normally imposing academy building seemed different today. Not a fortress keeping her out, but a stage waiting for her to claim it. Backstage was chaos, students in formal attire rushing to prepare for their performances. Grace found a quiet corner to change into the simple black dress her mother had purchased second-hand and carefully altered to fit perfectly. As she fastened her grandfather's gold cross necklace, her only adornment, Mrs. Bennett appeared, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "The auditorium is full," she reported. "Trustees, parents, faculty, students, even some representatives from Juilliard and Berkeley." Grace's hands froze on the necklace clasp. Music schools. Why would they come? To a high school showcase. Mrs. Bennet smiled mysteriously. I may have sent some recordings of your practice sessions to a few old colleagues. Your talent deserves recognition, Grace. She handed over Jorge's violin case. He asked me to give you this. Said he had custodial duties and couldn't leave. His post. Grace accepted the case, touched by Jorge's continuing discretion about their arrangement. When she opened it, she found a small note tucked beside the beautiful instrument. Music speaks when words fail. Today, let it speak for all of us who were told we didn't belong. The simple message brought tears to her eyes. She carefully tucked it into her dress pocket, a talisman of support. The showcase began with group performances. The choir, the jazz ensemble, the orchestra performing selections that showcased Westfield's musical tradition. Grace waited in the wings, watching the audience through a gap in the curtains. She spotted her mother in the back row, looking slightly out of place but radiantly proud in her Sunday best. Near the front sat Headmaster Price with the trustees, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed boredom. And there, almost invisible in his custodial uniform, Jorge stood by the auditorium doors, his posture attentive despite his attempt to blend into the background. 3 performers before her turn, Grace felt panic rising. The magnitude of what she was attempting suddenly seemed overwhelming. 6 weeks of intensive training against students with years of private lessons. A borrowed violin, no matter how. Exceptional, against family legacy instruments. A scholarship student from Dorchester against generations of privilege. "Oh, you don't have to be perfect," came a voice beside her. Mrs. Bennet had returned, her expression gentle. "You just have to be authentic. That's something many of these students with all their advantages haven't learned yet." Before Grace could respond, the current performance ended, and Mrs. Bennet was called to the stage to introduce the next student. Grace closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, as Jorge had taught her. When she opened them again, she saw Miss Harmon and Mr. Walsh watching her from across the wings, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed amusement. The betting pool. They were still waiting for her to fail. 2 more. Performances passed in a blur. Then Mrs. Bennet was on stage again, her voice carrying through the auditorium. Our next performer represents something special about Westfield Academy's commitment to nurturing talent wherever we find it. Subtle emphasis on wherever sent a ripple through the faculty section. Please welcome Grace Hernandez, performing the first movement of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. The applause was polite, but reserved as Grace stepped onto the stage. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, evaluating everything from her second-hand dress to her posture. Ms. Harmon and Mr. Walsh sat with barely concealed smirks, clearly anticipating disaster. Headmaster Price's expression was neutral, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern about his school's reputation. Grace positioned herself center stage, raised Jorge's violin to her chin, and closed her eyes. In that moment of darkness, she saw her grandfather's weathered hands guiding hers, heard his accented voice, "Music speaks when words fail, mija." She thought of her mother working double shifts, of Jorge teaching her in secret, of Mrs. Bennet finding the courage to stand against cruelty. When she opened her eyes, she found her mother in the audience, tears already glistening on her cheeks. With a deep breath, Grace began to play. The opening notes of the Mendelssohn rose clear and pure, filling the auditorium with sound that seemed too vast to come from a single instrument. Grace's technical skills, while newly acquired, served the music rather than hindered it. What she lacked in years of training, she made up for with something rarer, an authentic emotional connection to every phrase. In the audience, reactions shifted from polite attention to genuine surprise. Mrs. Bennet, watching from the wings, felt tears spring to her eyes as Grace navigated passages that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Jorge stood straighter by the auditorium doors, professional detachment giving way to unmistakable pride. The faculty members who had wagered on Grace's failure exchanged uncomfortable glances as it became clear that the scholarship student wasn't merely surviving, she was thriving. When Grace approached the cadenza, the moment Mr. Walsh had bet she would butcher, She paused almost imperceptibly, took a breath, and launched into it with confidence that belied her inexperience. The music flowed through her, each note a statement of defiance against those who had underestimated her. Her fingers found their places with certainty, the muscle memory she had built through countless hours of practice, carrying her through the most challenging sections. The rocker violin sang under her touch, its resonant tone filling every corner of the room. As Grace approached the movement's conclusion, she allowed herself to glimpse the audience. The trustees sat forward in their seats, their expressions of surprise and delight a stark contrast to their earlier indifference. Several students who had previously ignored her existence watched with newfound respect. In the back, her mother's face shone with tears of pride. The final notes hung in the air, resonating for a moment before giving way to silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause began. Tentative at first, then building to a thunderous standing ovation led by the music school representatives whose attendance Mrs. Bennet had arranged. Grace lowered the violin, momentarily stunned by the response. She had expected relief at avoiding humiliation, perhaps some polite applause. She had not expected this wave of genuine appreciation. As she took her bow, she caught sight of Jorge by the auditorium doors, discreetly wiping a tear from his weathered cheek. Backstage, Grace was immediately surrounded by students and faculty members, many of whom had never spoken to her before. Their congratulations blurred together in a daze of handshakes and praise. Through the crowd, she saw Ms. Harmon and Mr. Walsh retreating, their betting scheme now an embarrassment rather than an amusement. Mrs. Bennet approached, beaming with undisguised pride. "Exceptional, Grace, truly exceptional," she lowered her voice. "There are people who'd like to meet you, the representatives from Juilliard and Berkeley." Before Grace could process this, her mother pushed through the crowd, enveloping her in a fierce embrace. "Your grandfather would be so proud, mija," Elena whispered. "So proud." The remainder of the showcase passed in a blur for Grace. She sat with her mother in the audience, still clutching Jorge's precious violin, as the other performances continued. They seemed distant now, as if she were watching from behind glass. The reality of what she had accomplished, not just surviving the challenge but excelling beyond anyone's expectations, including her own, was still sinking in. After the final performance, as the audience filed out for the reception in the main hall, Grace sought out Jorge. She found him in his small custodial office, organizing cleaning supplies with his usual methodical precision. "Mr. Rodriguez," she called softly from the doorway, "I wanted to return your violin and thank you for everything." He turned, a genuine smile warming his usually reserved features. "You played beautifully, Grace, just as I knew you would." She carefully handed him the violin case. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "Yes, you could have," he countered, gently. "Perhaps not as quickly, not as confidently, but the music was already inside you. I merely helped you find it again." Grace hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her since their first lesson. "Why did you help me? You risked your job." Jorge was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the contours of the violin case. "When I was your age, I had a teacher who believed in me when no one else did. He saw past my circumstances to my potential." He looked up, his dark eyes intent. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to invest in your future when everyone else has written you off." "The tremor in your hand," Grace ventured. "Is that why you stopped performing?" A shadow crossed his face. "Stage fright," he admitted, flexing his right hand where the slight tremor was visible. "It began small, just a tremble before performances. Over time it worsened until I couldn't play in public without my hand shaking uncontrollably." His expression softened. "But today, watching you play, I felt what it was like to be on that stage again. Through your music, I remembered my own." Grace felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Will you teach me more, even though the showcase is over?" "If you wish," he agreed, clearly moved by the request. "But I think you'll soon have teachers far more qualified than an old janitor." "No one could be more qualified than you," Grace insisted. Before he could respond, voices called her name from the hallway. "The reception," she realized. "I should go." Jorge nodded. "Your audience awaits. Go." Enjoy your triumph. In the main. Hall the reception was in full swing. Trustees mingled with faculty, students chatted in excited clusters, and parents admired the student artwork displayed on easels around the perimeter. When Grace entered with her mother, Mrs. Bennet immediately ushered them toward a small group that included Headmaster Price and two distinguished-looking visitors. "Grace, I'd like you to meet Professor Abernathy from Juilliard and Dr. Chen from Berklee College of Music," Mrs. Bennet announced, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "They were quite impressed by your performance." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions and conversations that would have seemed impossible just that morning. Professor Abernathy spoke of summer programs for promising young musicians, while Dr. Chen discussed scholarship opportunities for students with exceptional talent but limited financial resources. Headmaster Price, sensing the changing winds, was effusive in his praise. "Grace is a shining example of Westfield's commitment to nurturing talent regardless of background," he declared, conveniently forgetting that he had been party to the original cruel setup. Through it all, Grace maintained a gracious composure that belied her inner tumult. When she finally had a moment alone with her mother, Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You did it, mija. You showed them all what you're capable of." "We did it," Grace corrected her. "You, me, Abuelo, Mr. Rodriguez, Mrs. Bennet, all of us together." As the reception wound down, Grace noticed a small commotion near the entrance to the hall. A tall, elegantly dressed older man had entered, causing several faculty members to react with obvious surprise. She watched as he approached Headmaster Price, who seemed simultaneously honored and uncomfortable by his presence. Mrs. Bennet appeared at Grace's side, her expression a mixture of shock and amusement. "That's Gerhard Müller," she whispered. "He retired as principal violinist with the Boston Symphony Orchestra years ago. He rarely attends events anymore." She hesitated, then added, "He's also one of the largest financial contributors to Westfield's endowment." Before Grace could process this information, Headmaster Price was leading the distinguished visitor in their direction. "Mr. Müller, may I present Grace Hernandez, our violin soloist, and her mother, Ms. Eleanor Hernandez." The elderly gentleman regarded Grace with keen blue eyes that missed nothing. "Young lady, your performance was quite remarkable, particularly given that you've only been studying for, 6 weeks? Grace's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Let's just say I have my sources." His gaze shifted briefly toward the back of the hall, where Jorge was discreetly emptying a trash can. "I'm curious, what are your plans for your musical education?" I haven't had time to think about it," Grace admitted. "Until today, I was just focused on not embarrassing myself at the showcase." Müller raised an eyebrow. "Well, you've done considerably better than that. With the right training, you could have a promising future." He turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Hernandez, with your permission, I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you and your daughter. Will Grace finally see her musical dreams come true, or will new challenges emerge on her path to success?" The tension in the air is palpable, as Mr. Müller's interest could change everything. Later that evening, Grace sat with her mother at their small kitchen table, staring at the business card Mr. Müller had given them. It bore his name and phone number, nothing more, no title, no affiliation, just the simple directive to call him on Monday to discuss the path forward. "What do you think he wants?" Grace asked, turning the heavy cardstock over in her fingers. Eleanor shook her head, still processing the day's events. "I don't know, mija, but opportunities like this don't come along often for people like us." A knock at their door startled them both. Elena rose to answer it, revealing Mrs. Bennet standing in the hallway, looking somewhat out of place in their modest apartment building. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said hesitantly. "I wanted to speak with you both about what happened today." Over cups of instant coffee, Mrs. Bennet explained the significance of Gerhard Müller's interest. "He funds a foundation that provides full scholarships to exceptional young musicians, not just tuition but living expenses, instrument costs, everything." She looked directly at Grace. "He rarely takes a personal interest in students, especially those without extensive formal training. The fact that he came to hear you specifically is unprecedented." "How did he even know about me?" Grace wondered. Mrs. Bennet's gaze dropped to her coffee cup. That's partly why I'm here. There's something you should know. She took a deep breath. Mr. Rodriguez, Jorge, isn't just a former orchestral violinist. Before his stage fright ended his performance career, he was concertmaster of the Barcelona Symphony and then played with the Boston Symphony under Müller's leadership. They've remained close friends for decades. Grace felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her. Jorge was a concertmaster, and he knows Müller? He prefers his privacy, Mrs. Bennet explained. After his career ended, he wanted a simple job away from the music world. But when he heard you playing, she smiled. He couldn't help himself, and after your first few lessons, he apparently contacted Müller. So all of this, the music school representatives, Mr. Müller's appearance, it was all arranged by Jorge? Grace was struggling to reconcile the humble janitor with this new information. He saw something in you that reminded him of himself, Mrs. Bennet said. Talent that deserved recognition regardless of circumstances. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. The betting pool among the faculty? It's been donated in full to establish a music scholarship fund for students from underserved communities. The teachers responsible have also been formally reprimanded. Elena, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. What does this all mean for Grace? Practically speaking, it means options, Mrs. Bennet replied. Müller's Foundation, summer programs at Juilliard or Berkeley, potentially early admission to a conservatory program with the right preparation. She looked at Grace. It means your grandfather's gift doesn't have to end with him. You can carry it forward perhaps further than he ever had the opportunity to go. After Mrs. Bennet left, Grace and Eleanor sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the day's revelations. Finally, Grace went to her grandfather's violin case, opening it with reverent hands. The instrument inside was not as fine as Jorge's, rocker, but it carried something more valuable, her family's history, her grandfather's legacy. What do you think I should do, Mama? She asked softly. Eleanor joined her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. I think you should follow the music wherever it leads you, Mija. Your grandfather always said you had a gift. Now others see it too. The following Monday, Grace sought out Jorge before her first class. She found him mopping the main hall, his movements as precise and methodical as his violin instruction had been. Mr. Rodriguez, she called, approaching him. Or should I say, Maestro? He looked up, a faint smile touching his lips. Jorge is fine, he replied simply. You called Mr. Müller about me, she said. Not a question, but a statement. He nodded. I did. Why didn't you tell me who you really were? Jorge leaned on his mop, considering. Would it have mattered? Would you have believed that a janitor was once a concertmaster? Or would you have thought I was a sad old man living in the past? Grace had no answer for that. Instead, she asked, what happens now? That depends on you, he replied. Gerhardt's offer is genuine. His foundation could open doors that would otherwise remain closed to you. But the path of a musician is never easy, no matter how much financial support you have. Will you keep teaching me? The question came out smaller, more vulnerable than she had intended. Jorge's expression softened. For as long as you wish, though soon you'll have teachers far more current in their methods than I am. No one else can teach me what you do, Grace insisted. The others can teach me technique, theory, history, but you teach me how to make the violin speak. For the first time since she'd known him, Jorge seemed genuinely moved beyond his usual reserved demeanor. Then we shall continue, he said simply. In the weeks that followed, Grace's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Gerhard Müller's foundation provided not just financial support for her musical education, but connections to a world that had previously seemed as distant as the moon. She began formal lessons with a professor from the New England Conservatory, while continuing her clandestine sessions with Jorge, each mentor nurturing different aspects of her musicianship. At Westfield, the social dynamics shifted subtly but significantly. Grace was no longer invisible. Her performance had ensured that, but neither was she fully accepted by all. Some students, impressed by her talent and the attention it had, garnered from prestigious institutions, sought her friendship. Others, particularly those whose own musical abilities had been overshadowed, maintained a cool distance. What surprised Grace most was the change in the faculty. Ms. Harmon and Mr. Walsh avoided her entirely, their embarrassment at being exposed still acute. But other teachers who had previously ignored her existence now went out of their way to encourage her, as if her talent had somehow made her worthy of their attention. Mrs. Bennet, however, had become a true ally. She arranged for Grace to have access to practice rooms whenever needed, and defended her vigorously against any suggestion that her showcase success had been a fluke. Single-handedly changing the culture of an institution as entrenched as Westfield. "There's no small feat," she told Grace during one of their now regular check-ins, "but you've made them question their assumptions, and that's the beginning of change." 1 month after the showcase, Westfield Academy held a special assembly to announce the establishment of the Hernandez-Rodriguez Music Scholarship, funded by the former betting pool and additional donations from faculty and parents inspired by Grace's performance. The scholarship would provide musical instruction to talented students from underserved communities in Boston. As Headmaster Price made the announcement, Grace sat between her mother and Jorge in the auditorium, both of them visibly moved by this unexpected honor. What none of them knew was that the scholarship had been Mrs. Bennet's initiative, her way of ensuring that the cruelty that had almost derailed Grace's talent would instead create opportunities for others like her. After the assembly, Eleanor embraced Grace tightly. "Your grandfather used to say that music has the power to transform lives. I don't think even he could have imagined how true that would be for you." Grace looked over her mother's shoulder at Jorge, who stood slightly apart, his expression a mixture of pride and something that might have been regret for his own career cut short. In that moment, Grace made a silent promise, to herself, to her grandfather, and to Jorge, that she would never take this opportunity for granted. As spring gave way to summer, Grace's days filled with intensive practice, theory lessons, and preparation for the summer program at Tanglewood, to which Mueller had secured her admission. The trajectory of her life had altered dramatically, but her foundation remained the same: her mother's unwavering support, her grandfather's musical legacy, and Jorge's guiding wisdom. On the last day of the school year, Grace found herself alone in the music room, playing her grandfather's violin. The piece was not Mendelssohn this time, but Bach's Chaconne, a mountain of a composition that Jorge had suggested she begin exploring. So absorbed was she in the challenging music that she didn't notice Mrs. Bennet enter until the teacher spoke. "You've come so far in such a short time," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "I can't wait to see where you'll be in a year." Grace lowered the violin. "I've been meaning to ask you something. That first day when you told me I'd been selected for the showcase, you knew it was a setup, didn't you?" Mrs. Bennet's expression grew solemn. "Yes," she admitted, "and I'm not proud of my part in it. I should have objected more strongly from the beginning. But you changed your mind," Grace pointed out. "You decided to help me instead." "Because you deserved it," Mrs. Bennet said simply. "Your talent, your dedication. They made me question, not just the bet, but all the assumptions I'd been making about students like you." She hesitated. "I've taught music at Westfield for 17 years. In all that time, I've never questioned who gets access to musical education and who doesn't. Your journey has forced me to confront my own complicity in a system that values privilege over talent." The honesty of this confession touched Grace deeply. "Thank you," she said quietly, "not just for helping me, but for creating the scholarship. It means other students might get the chance I almost didn't have." In her final week at Westfield before summer break, Grace was called to Headmaster Price's office. She entered warily, still uncertain of her standing with the man who had initially approved her humiliation. "Ah, Grace," he greeted her with newfound warmth. "Please sit down. I wanted to discuss your fall schedule." "My schedule?" Grace asked, confused. "Yes. Mrs. Bennet informs me that you've been accepted to the preparatory division at the New England Conservatory for weekend studies this fall. We'd like to adjust your Westfield schedule to accommodate this opportunity and reduce some of your non-essential academic requirements." Grace stared at him, processing this unexpected support. "Thank you, sir. That would be helpful." Headmaster Price leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Grace, I owe you an apology. The circumstances under which you were selected for the showcase were inappropriate. I allowed it to happen under my leadership, and for that, I am sorry." The apology, though clearly rehearsed, seemed genuine enough. Grace nodded her acceptance, choosing to focus on the future rather than past wrongs. "Westfield Academy prides itself on recognizing excellence," he continued. "Your performance has reminded us that excellence doesn't always come packaged in the way we expect." He smiled tightly. "I look forward to seeing what you accomplish in the coming years." As she left his office, Grace knew the apology was as much about protecting the school's reputation as it was about genuine remorse. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that she belonged at Westfield as much as any legacy student. The last person Grace sought out before summer break was Jorge. She found him, as always, quietly maintaining the school, this time repairing a loose floorboard in one of the practice rooms. "I wanted to thank you," she said, watching him work with the same precision he applied to violin technique, "for believing in me, for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself." Jorge looked up, his tools paused mid-task. "What I saw was someone who loved music for its own sake, not for accolades or advantage. That is rarer than you might think, even among professional musicians." Grace hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since learning of his past. "Do you ever regret it, leaving performance behind?" Jorge considered this thoughtfully. "I regret that fear took the choice from me," he said finally. "But the path I've walked has had its own rewards." He gestured to her. "Being part of your journey, for instance, watching you grow into your gift. These are joys I might never have known had my life taken a different turn." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm going to make you proud," she promised. "All of you. You, Mama, Abuelo." Jorge smiled, the expression warming his usually reserved features. "You already have, Grace, you already have." As summer unfolded, Grace immersed herself in music more deeply than ever before. The Tanglewood program introduced her to peers with similar passion and dedication, though few had stories as unconventional as hers. Some had been playing since they could walk. Others came from families of musicians stretching back generations. Yet Grace's unique journey, from a cruelly conceived bet to genuine recognition, gave her perspective that many of her fellow students lacked. "Music isn't a birthright," she told a friend who complained about the program's rigorous schedule. "It's a privilege, one that not everyone gets to experience." In August, before returning to Boston for her sophomore year, Grace gave her first public recital at Tanglewood's small recital hall. In the audience sat her mother, Mrs. Bennett, Jorge, and Gerhard Müller, the unlikely quartet of supporters who had changed the course of her life. The program included works by Bach, Mendelssohn, and a contemporary piece by a female composer from the Dominican Republic, a nod to her own heritage. When Grace took the stage, violin in hand, she no longer felt like an imposter. The instrument was an extension of herself, the music a language she was increasingly fluent in. As she drew her bow across the strings for the opening notes of the Bach Chaconne, Grace thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the crowded hallways of Westfield, where she had tried to disappear, to center stage where she now stood confidently. From the cruel wager intended to humiliate her to the scholarship established in her and Jorge's names to lift up others. The music flowed through her, telling a story of struggle and triumph, of cruelty transformed into opportunity, of talent recognized despite the barriers placed before it. In the audience, Elena wiped away tears of pride, while Jorge sat with perfect posture, his hands still for once free from the tremor that had ended his own career. When the final notes faded, the applause was immediate and genuine. Grace took her bow, her gaze finding each of her supporters in turn. The mother who had sacrificed everything for her future, the teacher who had found the courage to stand against injustice, the mentor who had recognized her gift, and the benefactor who had opened doors. As she straightened, Grace knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would have its own challenges and obstacles, but she would face them with the resilience and determination that had brought her this far. From mockery to mastery, her journey with the violin had only just begun, but already it had transformed not just her life, but the lives of those around her. In the green room after her performance, Grace was surrounded by well-wishers and potential mentors impressed by her playing. Through the crowd, she caught sight of Jorge standing slightly apart, as was his habit. She excused herself and made her way to him. "What did you think?" she asked, suddenly shy despite the enthusiastic reception her performance had received. Jorge's eyes shone with pride. "You played not just with skill, but with soul. Your grandfather would recognize his own heart in your music." No praise could have meant more. Grace impulsively hugged him, feeling him stiffen in surprise before awkwardly returning the embrace. The best is yet to come, she promised both to him and to herself. And standing there, surrounded by the people who had believed in her when others had not, Grace knew it was true. The violin that had once been a tool intended for her humiliation had become instead her voice, her future, and her legacy. The music that now filled her life would continue to open doors not just for her, but potentially for others whose talents might otherwise have gone unrecognized. As summer faded into fall and Grace returned to Westfield for her sophomore year, she carried with her not just improved skills, but a deeper understanding of what music could accomplish. It could bridge divides of class and culture. It could transform cruelty into opportunity. It could give voice to those who had been silenced. Most importantly, it could remind everyone who heard it that beauty can emerge from unexpected places, and that talent, true talent, transcends the arbitrary boundaries society constructs. For Grace Hernandez, the journey from mockery to mastery was not just a personal triumph, but a testament to the power of belief. Belief in oneself, belief in others, and belief in the transformative potential of art. What had begun as a cruel joke had become instead the first movement of a life symphony still being composed, note by hopeful note. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.